Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing the Wyndshaper Book 1 in the Ivenhence Chronicles by Kate Argus. This video is not monetarily sponsored, however I did receive an advanced copy of the book from Kate Argus in order to review and feature on my social channels. For anybody who chooses to prioritize diversity in their library, the book does feature several queer individuals, and it is written with a little bit of authority, seeing as Argus is a member of the queer community themselves. And generally, this is where I would personally put together a list of content and trigger warnings. However, the book itself does have its own content warning page that I will just read directly off of. Hello, dear reader. Please note that this story contains themes and situations which could be upsetting or triggering. If you aren't concerned by potential triggers, feel free to skip this page. This book contains the following: violence, battles, graphic scenes, death, asphyxiation, mention of sexual assault, mention of slavery, prejudice, physical torment. While many of these themes are only touched on briefly or shown in one chapter, I would never want you to risk your mental well-being while you're reading my book. Please be assured that there are no scenes which contain graphic sexual assault. In addition, none of the LGBTQIA+ characters depicted are dead-named or misgendered. I want you to feel safe as you escape into the world of the Wyndshaper. However, that being said, there is one potential content issue that I did note that is not featured on the content warning, but we will get into that a little bit later. Now, the book does follow childhood acquaintances Fletch and Draythen after the assassination of their parents and their reunion 15 years later. Draythen now being king, as his father had originally been king, so he had to step in as king at the age of 15 and has spent the past 15 years growing into an adult and running the kingdom. And then we have Fletch, who was the daughter of the original king's right-hand man. He was part of the castle guard and, you know, was very important in that regard. And he was also killed in the assassination while protecting Prince Draythen. And after her father's death, she was only about 7 when it happened. And she decided after a while of living at the orphanage that she just, you know, wanted to sign up and follow in her father's footsteps and protect the castle as well. So she became what is known as a forester. We didn't get a full backstory about the foresters, but from what I understood, they're a group of people who protect the outside lands of the kingdom, you know, more so especially in the forest and things like that. So Fletch has lived in mostly solitude for the past 15 years. Their paths cross when the king is traveling through the lands, attempting to get to a neighboring kingdom to pay respects for the death of his uncle, and their caravan is attacked by what are known as unbreathing. Unbreathing are these demonic, kind of vampire-like beings where they will pretty much like kill and suck the blood out of a person, taking their life force, and they will take over other people's bodies and essentially use them as husks and like skins for themselves. So it's very, very hard to point out an unbreathing unless you are a select few people. So Fletch comes in the nick of time. Well, kind of. Fletch comes fast enough in order to save the king, but unfortunately the rest of his traveling caravan was killed off. So the pair make their way back to the castle, trying to outrun the unbreathing that are still after the king, and they make it back okay. And seeing as Fletch is one of the only people who has the capability of telling a person that is unbreathing because of her abilities as a Wyndshaper, somebody who has an affinity with the wind and some of the elements. And as such a person who is able to tell these unbreathing, she makes the request of staying in the castle and becoming one of the guards in order to better protect the kingdom and the king. So Fletch leaves her post as forester and comes and is now a part of the castle guard. So Fletch has to prove her worth as being a sentinel and find her way in this kingdom that she hasn't been a part of in 15 years. Meanwhile, Draythen has to continue running the kingdom on top of having these attempts on his life and try and figure out where they're coming from and why. And the book continues, and as the book goes along, we discover several different conspiracies and we have to unravel and figure out the truth and who are traitors and who aren't. And it really is a quite fascinating book. Like, I'll be honest, I probably did not explain it as well as some of the other books that I've reviewed, but there is so much that goes on in the book. And like, it doesn't look like that terribly long of a read, but it just has so much information and so much content, and it actually took a fair amount of time to read, which is a little bit unusual for myself, but none of these are like negatives about it, you know? Like, I was incredibly excited to be reading it. I thought it was fascinating. It captivated me from the beginning, with the exception of like the first chapter, which was more so just the prologue. It took me a little bit of an adjustment period to get used to the writing style. Like, it's very, very easy to read. It's very attainable, but they do use a little bit more eloquent dialogue and makes it sound a little bit more old-timey and gives it that kind of fantasy period piece feel. So it did take me the first prologue chapter to adjust to the style and get used to it, but from there I was incredibly captivated and interested the entire book. And I did find it to be incredibly well written. It was beautiful and eloquent without being pretentious, and it didn't feel like it was below my reading level, which is not something that I have felt in, I honestly couldn't even tell you how long. Like, as a kid, I always just had more of an elevated reading level, and you know, once high school kind of came around, I ended up just kind of sticking with YA because it was the most interesting to me. And some of the more old-timey classics were just a little bit too far. Like, I could understand and comprehend them, but they were just so boring that I chose to read a little bit below my reading level because that tended to hold the most interest for me. But this actually feels like something that is within my like reading level, that has just as much interest and, you know, captivation, but without it being like super easy to read. Like, it actually kind of challenged my brain a little bit and like kept me invested because I actually had to pay attention instead of being able to just like breeze through it because it was way below my level, you know? I definitely wouldn't say that the book is YA at all. It is very much more adult fantasy, but without the bore or the tediousness that generally is found in adult fantasy. I would just say it's very friendly for pretty much any age group, like all the high schoolers, teenagers, like anybody could get into it, but it would also be just as friendly for people who were older, especially because the main characters throughout the book end up being about 22 and 30. So, you know, definitely like a more adult age range than I'm used to seeing in these fantasy type novels. We have just this entire fantasy world created and really, really well done. We're thrown into it without it feeling like we're thrown into it. Like, it doesn't leave you lost in any way. It gives you just enough information to be able to comprehend and understand what is going on as you're reading without being too entirely front-loaded as well, which is something that I generally experience. We either get way too much information at once, or it definitely feels like it's like, I don't have enough time to explain to you how this fantasy world works, so bop, 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 there we go. Or we get thrown into it and there's no explanation. It's like, I literally have no idea what's going on. This was a perfect meld of being in the middle. We got enough information to comprehend exactly what was going on as it was going on, and it was just very, very well paced, and the world building was just so on point. There is a bit of a romance featured in the book between some of the characters, and in a delightful change of pace to what I personally am used to, it was like an incredible slow burn. Like, literally took the entirety of the book to develop and get to a point where it was more so in canon. And that never happens. Like, literally, like, I don't think I could tell you another book series where the romance was quite as slow burn as this was, and not in a frustrating way, because I feel like if you are going to get slow burn, normally it's in the strain of like, there's miscommunications, or like a love triangle type deal, or it's just like so slow that it's frustrating and it's like, God, if y'all weren't just stupid, this would have already happened. This was definitely not the case. It felt just incredibly organic and natural and not at all rushed or like it was out of nowhere or for no reason or anything like that, which are usually my main criticisms of romance being featured. And it by no means was the primary, you know, focus of the plot. Like, it was very, very much a backseat plot device, and I would love to see so much more of this kind of handling of romance. Because I'll be honest, there are a lot of books that I think would have been very much improved by not featuring romance. Obviously, you know, because that is very much like our society is very much like romance and relationship based. Of course, we are going to see a lot of that featured in literature, but a lot of the times it just doesn't add up, or it just is forced, out of place, and this was not the case. I'm actually kind of excited about the pairing, and again, can't tell you the last time where I was like, oh, they're so cute, you know, because it's just not necessarily my cup of tea most of the time, but this was so well done that you couldn't help but root for them, especially because we get the entirety of the book to see their friendship and relationship develop and the subtle hints at them having feelings for each other and a potential romance. It was just chef's kiss. So well done. I thought that the book was a nice mix of events going on. Like, we did get, obviously, we got a little bit of the hint of romance thrown in. We got, you know, some political background of the kingdom. We got some battles and action going on. We got some more personal developments and relationships going on. Like, it was just a very well-rounded build of a universe and of a story, you know, especially like I'm somebody, I enjoy fantasy, but I'm very much not a big fan of the battles or the wars that we tend to see in a lot of fantasy. Like, I want a lot of the more day-to-day mundane stuff, but again, without it being boring, and I thought that this book did a really good job at giving us that. I honestly, like, genuinely cannot tell you the last time that I enjoyed reading a fantasy book this much without any reservations, because I've definitely, you know, read some recently that I really, really liked, but this was just truly, like, I thought it was a great book. And it didn't have any reservations or catches. So it wasn't a great book for a debut novel or a great book for an indie book or anything like that. It was just very flat, straight up, point and center, a good book. But that being said, this is actually a debut novel, I believe. I believe this is Kate Argus's first work. And I truly, like, have trouble believing that, because I've read work from like well-published authors that does not quite match the attention to detail and world building and well-written atmosphere that the Wyndshaper does. So I am so incredibly excited to see where Argus goes from here. For all of the praise that I have about this book, like, literally I only have one criticism and thing that I primarily want to focus on in discussion, and that is the fact that the book does feature the G slur. For anybody who is unfamiliar, it is a slur used towards the Roma and Romani people. And as a people, they have asked that, like the rest of us as a society, not use the word anymore. In the US, we didn't really get the memo that it was specifically a slur, whereas in Europe it is very widely used as being one. The US got the more bastardized version of it, where the assumption is like, oh, it means nomad, traveler, boho, that kind of vibe, which is not necessarily the case. There is a very loaded historical history to it. But you know what I mean. It does have a very loaded history to the word. I wanted to have a discussion about it because of the way the word was used in the book. One, I do not think that it was meant in any way to be hateful especially giving some of the media presence and, you know, the content warnings and just the entire vibe that Argus gives off as an author would be the exact opposite of intentionally using a slur. So whether or not they're aware that it is a slur, I'm unsure, but the storyline and context in which the word is used within the book is actually very similar to the Roma people. Obviously, because this is a fantasy novel with like its own world building and it does not take place in our modern time with our modern history or anything like that. The community of people that the word is used for is not referred to as the Roma or Romani people in the book. In the book, they are the Windarian, and they are a nomadic group of people who travel from place to place. They don't have any kind of permanent settlement and find homes nomadically as they travel from kingdom to kingdom. And these nomadic people have the specific Windarian name for themselves, and that is the proper name of their people. But most of the other people in the book who are not involved with the community refer to them as the G-slur, and that is just what their common name is. Within the book, Fletch does actually educate King Drathan about the context of the word, because he refers to them as the G-slur, and she's like, well, actually, they're the Windarian people, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Windarian. I'm going with Windarian, and she was like, they are, in a sense, you know, the G-slur, but the actual term for the people is Windarian. And so from then on within the book, anytime King Drathan is referring to the community, for the first couple times, he would start saying the G-slur and then cut himself off mid-sentence and then change it to and say the Windarian people. And then after a few instances of that, he got used to the word and just automatically referred to them as the Windarian people. And he also takes time to educate himself on the people, because the Windarian people do come to visit the kingdom and the castle. So Drathan does educate himself a little bit on their customs and does it respectfully. And so the context and storyline within the book in which the word is used does feel pretty reminiscent to the actual historical context of the Roma people, just without having the Roma name attached to them. However, that doesn't necessarily excuse the use of an actual modern real life slur being used, but it does very much lead me to believe that it was not intended to be offensive. I do think that the book should have come up with its own original name instead of using the G-slur. It could have come up with its own in-universe equivalent to it, but I also understand the usage of the word because it is more commonly known to modern people today, and it is not widely known as being a slur, so I understand the usage of it, but I did want to bring it up because nobody should feel uncomfortable while reading the book, and I could see some Roma and Romani people being a little bit uncomfortable by the use. But with the exception of that matter, I did think that the book was incredibly well written and just truly a fantastic novel, and I really, really look forward to seeing the rest of the series come out and where it develops from where we left off. So if you are interested in checking out the book for yourself, I will leave links to the book and Kate Argus down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all.